Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating idea that might just change how you see, well, our entire species. And it all starts by questioning a famous phrase we all think we know.
Right, we've all heard it a million times, survival of the fittest. And it probably brings to mind, the strongest, most ruthless individuals clawing their way to the top. But what if that whole idea is based on a huge and kind of dangerous misunderstanding?
So the popular myth is all about brute force and aggression. But that's not actually what Darwin meant. Not at all. For him, and for biologists today, fitness is simply about reproductive success. Who leaves behind the most kids? In fact, Darwin himself wrote that communities with the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. So, what if our real strength isn't strength at all?
And this brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer: survival of the friendliest. The theory that cooperation, not cutthroat competition, is the real secret to human success.
Think about it. For most of our history, we shared the planet with at least 4 other human species. Some of them had brains as big as ours, maybe even bigger. And yet, only we survived. Why? The argument is it's because we mastered this incredible ability to work together, to communicate and cooperate even with total strangers to get things done. This was our superpower. This was our evolutionary edge.
Okay, so this might sound like a nice, feel-good idea, right? But is there any hard evidence to back it up? For that, we have to go to this really remarkable experiment that started in a Siberian lab way back during the Cold War.
The method, which was pioneered by a scientist named Dmitry Belyaev, was just brilliantly simple. He started with a bunch of wild, aggressive silver foxes. And in each new generation, he would just identify the calmest, most curious, least fearful foxes, basically the friendliest ones, and he only allowed them to breed. That's it. And he did this year after year for decades.
The results were honestly astonishing. The friendly line of foxes didn't just become tame and act like dogs, their actual bodies changed. They started developing floppy ears, spotted coats, and smaller teeth, physical traits Belyaev never even selected for. This whole package of changes, it's known as domestication syndrome.
But here's the real kicker. This is the mind-blowing part. When scientists tested these friendly foxes, they were absolute geniuses at understanding human gestures, like pointing. They were as good as puppies, and way better than the wild foxes or even chimpanzees. So, the crucial point is this: advanced social smarts just came along for the ride. It was an accidental byproduct of selecting only for friendliness.
So it seems like we're built to be friendly cooperators. It's our superpower. But this story has a dark side, a really deep biological paradox we have to confront.
Because if our evolution literally selected for friendliness, then how on earth do we explain our unique and horrifying capacity for group violence, for dehumanization, and for unimaginable cruelty?
The answer seems to be rooted in our biology, specifically in a hormone called oxytocin. You've probably heard it called the hug hormone, but a better name might be the mama bear hormone, because its effect completely changes depending on who you're dealing with. And this is where you see the two faces of oxytocin. For the people we see as part of our in-group, our friends, our family, our tribe, it boosts trust and empathy. It makes us feel closer. But the moment we perceive a threat from an out-group, that very same hormone can fuel aggression, defensiveness, and a desire to punish.
And this hormonal switch, it enables one of the most dangerous capabilities of the human mind: the ability to dehumanize other people.
When our group feels threatened, we can actually dampen the activity in the parts of our brain that are responsible for empathy, for seeing others as fully human. It's like a switch that gets flipped, allowing us to treat other people as objects or even as animals, making cruelty feel permissible.
And look, this isn't just a theory. A psychologist named Noor Kataili used a scale inspired by that famous ascent of man image to ask people how evolved they considered different groups to be. The results are, well, they're chilling. On average, Americans in the study rated Muslims about 10 points below fully human, and Hungarians rated the Roma people as somewhere between an early hominid and an ape. It's a stark, real-world example of this dehumanization in action.
So what triggers this awful switch?
Kataili found that the single biggest predictor is the perception that the other group is dehumanizing your group first, And this creates this terrifying feedback loop, a vicious cycle of what's called reciprocal dehumanization that just drives conflict.
So we have this dual nature, right? This immense capacity for friendliness and this immense capacity for cruelty. And it's often driven by the very same biology. So the obvious question is, what do we do about it?
Are we just stuck in this cycle forever? Is there any way to break it and harness our friendlier side for good? Well, the research suggests there's a powerful and surprisingly simple answer.
It's called the contact hypothesis. And the idea is that the best way to diffuse conflict between groups is to simply bring them together, but not to argue or debate. The key is to get them to cooperate on some kind of shared goal. That's what rebuilds empathy and flips that dehumanization switch back on.
A classic proof of this is something called the jigsaw classroom, which was created back in the 70s to ease racial tensions in schools. In the experiment, each student was given one unique piece of information they needed to pass the test. All of a sudden, other kids realized they weren't competing against a student like Carlos. They needed his piece of the puzzle to succeed. They went from being competitors to being cooperators.
The results were profound. Just a few hours a week doing this led to less prejudice, better grades, higher self-esteem, and more empathy across the board. It just goes to show that when our survival depends on cooperating with an outsider, we are very, very good at quickly making them an insider.
And this whole principle scales up, big time. Political scientist Erica Chenoweth studied every major campaign for regime change for over a century. Her data is just undeniable. Nonviolent campaigns, which depend on mass cooperation and friendliness, were more than twice as successful as violent ones. Friendliness, it turns out, just wins.
So at the end of the day, our capacity for friendliness is a double-edged sword. It gave us this cooperative superpower that allowed us to dominate the planet, but it also contains the seeds of our absolute worst conflicts when we draw that circle of us way too tightly.
But here is the final and, I think, most crucial point. Understanding all this doesn't doom us. It actually empowers us. By understanding these switches in our own minds, we gain the ability to consciously fight back against dehumanization and to choose to expand our circle. So the question this explainer really leaves us with is a personal one. Who will you let into your circle of friends?